Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it's almost midday here, just looking at the clock, a couple of minutes to go. There's Big Ben. Prime Minister's questions is on the way, of course, without the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister's in China. She could have done it on Skype, I suppose, but they didn't think of that. Anyway, probably the Wi-Fi is not strong enough in the House of Commons. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, is here. Laura Kuenssberg is with the Prime Minister. John, this business, this vote this hour, we'll see what comes up at PMQs. This vote on restoring Parliament needs a lot of work to it. And there's a division as to whether, does it close down and do they all move out for quite a long period, a number of years, or do they try to do it while they're still in, which would probably be even more expensive? Either way, multi-billion-pound project.
That's right, and a division about whether you commit quickly to spend those billions of pounds on doing up the Palace of Westminster, or whether you say, look, let's do this in principle, and then come back and talk about it again later on, and then again later on, when we've got detailed plans for how to do this thing. And for some reason, among others, the government seems to be curiously reluctant to commit to billions of pounds in a hurry to this building. Practically, it would be difficult to make such a commitment now, but also they're all aware, we are all aware, that politicians, the Palace of Westminster, is not in the highest regard with an awful lot of people now. And to talk about spending billions in anything like a hurry would not go down well in this age, this time of, well, some disregard for politics and cynicism about politicians.
It is the most famous parliamentary building in the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For those who don't think we need to refurbish it, what would they have us do? Just let it crumble to dust on the banks of the Thames? Yeah. What would that say of this country?
There's no plan to leave it alone and just let it rot into dust on the side of the River Thames. There was an idea of keeping the rolling repairs going, which have been going on for so very long. You walk around the Palace of Westminster and get into the cellars and the attics, as I've done on one or two occasions. You can really see the state of the place. A lot of work really does need to be done, and you can carry on doing that. But as you say, it is a hugely iconic building, one of the most famous, not just parliamentary buildings, but buildings on the entire planet. It's a source of pride to the country. And I'm at risk now of sounding like an advocate for getting on and getting the job done.
The impartial BBC line here, is it?
But there will be a vote later on that says pretty much exactly that. Let's bite the bullet and get on with it. That may even be passed. But even if that's the case, I think they'll carry on talking and carry on watching and waiting.
Is this a vote for government, or is it a vote for the Commons to take? Is it a free vote, or is it a whipped government vote?
It is a free vote. So Andrea Leadsom, who's the leader of the House of Commons, is putting down motions saying, shall we carry on patching up, or shall we decide now to do the big job, in which case you carry on talking. Right. Chris Bryant, the Labour MP, and some big Tories behind him are saying, look, enough faffing about. Let's just bite the bullet and at least commit now to what we need to do.
What would you do?
I would commit to get on with it. I don't fancy having a decanting. I think we should try and commit to doing it, and we'll work around it. I mean, it will be a bit of a building site. But
wouldn't that make it more expensive?
Well, it probably would a bit. And I do understand, you know, there is the political imperative that John rightly points out. There's the idea of spending billions of pounds on it. But I'm with you. I think it's an iconic building of international importance.
Well, not being a builder myself, I would take the advice that we're being given, that we all need to clear out of it, do the work as quickly and as soundly as possible,
and then go back in.
Go back in. Well,
who's giving
nobody
that
agrees with me that we ought to move Parliament up to the northeast of England and have a bit of sharing out of the glory that is our national Parliament.
No one agrees with you.
No one agrees with that, unfortunately.
Why is that?
So I don't know. I can't imagine. So we seem to be stuck in London, and
well, it is the capital.
Yeah. So
since
given
the
that,
St Bede, I don't think there's been an argument for that 1,500 years ago. Yeah.
I'm having to reconcile myself to moving out and then hopefully being elected again and getting back in.
Where would they go? There's a building I think has been empty for a while. It was an old department, well, not that old, it was quite a new building. But Department of Health area on Whitehall?
There's one or two possibilities very near to where we're sitting now. I think the building over by the Supreme Court has been discussed. Then there's talk of going to Birmingham. Then there's talk, you get into the conversation there. Why not Darlington? Why not Chesterfield? Why not Downing? You could carry on. There'd be lots of voices calling for all sorts of movement, and that argument's going to carry on too, isn't it?
What is the cost? I've seen a figure of 6 billion.
Yeah, 6 billion is the figure, roughly 6 billion, if there's such a thing as roughly 6 billion, has been I remember when 6 billion was a lot of money, but it's being discussed now.
All
But
right.
of course, when it came to the repairs on the Victoria Tower, the real cost was double the estimate, and that's another.
All right. On that, we'll go straight over to the Commons. It's David Lidington and Emily Thornberry.
My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in China, building on the existing strong ties between our two countries, and she is accompanied by the largest business delegation that this government has yet led.
Ian Manns. Mr. Speaker, a number of Carillion employees and former employees live in my constituency, and indeed the company has an apprenticeship training centre in Gateshead. They all still face an uncertain future. Will the government act now to prevent similar future corporate theft, where pirate directors have siphoned off what should have been hundreds of millions of pounds in pension contributions to pay bogus dividends and unearned corporate bonuses to themselves? Exactly what action does the government propose to take?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I completely understand the anxiety that must be affecting the apprentices and their families in the honourable gentleman's constituency. He probably heard me say during last week's debates that the Construction Industry Training Board has taken responsibility for finding alternative employers to enable all those apprentices who were with Carillion to continue and complete their qualifications. They are making good progress in that work, but I shall certainly ensure that the particular concern he's expressed about Gateshead is brought to their attention. On the broader question, the House will understand, Mr. Speaker, that it would be wrong for me to preempt findings by independent inquiry by the official receiver, but we've already made clear that we'll be publishing proposals later this year to stop directors being able to siphon off pension funds in any the way that he described.
Mr. Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will be aware that the country faces significant cyber threats from other countries and from non-state actors. He will also be aware that we're protected from those by our security and intelligence services, including the men and women at GCHQ in my own county of Gloucestershire. When the government publishes the results of the security review, will he confirm that we will continue, as we have since 2010, to invest in those capabilities to keep our country safe?
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct, and I'm happy to give him that assurance on behalf of the government. The sad truth is that in this country we face a growing threat of cyber attacks from states, from serious crime gangs and from hacking groups. We do have a robust national cyber security strategy to protect critical services, including our democratic processes, and that is underpinned by nearly £2 billion of government investment.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by welcoming the Minister back to his role deputising for the Prime Minister. Last time he did so was in December 2016, when his party was 17 points ahead in the polls, and he told the House that the Labour Party was, I quote, quarrelling like the film Mutiny on the Bounty, reshot by the team who made Carry On. Well, what a difference a year makes. To intrude further on the government's public grief, because I genuinely hope that we can reach consensus across this House today on a very important issue. Next Tuesday will be the centenary of women gaining the right to vote in Britain, followed later in 1918 by a second right to stand for Parliament. Now, I'm sure that the Minister will agree that we have a long way to go with regard to the second right. After all, I am the only Emily elected since 1918, and he is one of 155 Davids. And the women behind me on these benches represent 1/4 of all the women elected in the last 100 years, but it is still not good enough. So does the Minister think... but will the Minister tell us how we can best increase female representation in this House?
Mr. Speaker, Can I first of all thank the Right Honourable Lady for her words of welcome, and clearly my previous remarks struck a chord with her to have been treasured in the way that they clearly have, and it's a delight to me to see the Right Honourable Lady still in her place when no fewer than 97 members of her front bench have either been sacked or resigned since the Leader of the Opposition took office. I pay credit to her sticking power, though she must sometimes whisper to herself, surely I'm a celebrity, please get me out of here. The point that she raised is a serious one, and I think that all political parties represented here, she's right to seek to make this consensual, want to encourage more women candidates to come forward. I'm pleased that my party, since I was first elected 25 years ago, has made very considerable progress, but I also accept that there is more to be done. I hope that she, for her part, will accept that we have now had 2 women leaders and prime ministers, so they have a bit of catching up to do.
Say, Mr. Speaker, that if the party opposite is so proud of having a female leader, why are so many of them trying to get rid of her? And why has she had to run away to China to get away from them? But I thank him for that answer, and I totally agree with his sentiments. But let me ask him also about the first right that I mentioned, a right that millions of women received 100 years ago this week, the basic right to vote. It was originally restricted to women with property over the age of 30. Then 90 years ago, it was extended to all women over 21. And almost 50 years ago, it was extended to all men and women over the age of 18. So can I ask the Minister a simple question? How many more years do we have to wait until the vote is extended to everyone over 16?
Mr. Speaker, the age of 18 rather than 16 is widely recognised as the age at which one becomes an adult, and that is when full citizenship rights are attained. There's only a handful of countries in the world that have a nationwide voting age below 18, and we believe that it is right that the age of majority, 18, should continue to be the age at which people become eligible to vote.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, the honourable gentleman makes international comparisons, Mr. Speaker, but I have to say to the Minister that it was this country and a Labour government that led the way in Europe and the English-speaking world in reducing the voting age to 18 in 1969. And where we led, others followed, and it will be the same here. So let me move on to a second question that I would like to ask the honourable gentleman, which is this. I've listened carefully to his answer, but I didn't hear any logical explanation for the different rights that we give 16-year-olds in this country. I mean, at 16, we are free from parental control, we can leave home, we can start a family, we can get married, we can start work, we can pay taxes, we can join the forces. So, can the Minister give us a logical explanation why a 16-year-old should not have the right to vote?
Mr. Speaker, I have to say, slightly baffled by the honourable lady's comments when compared with what her party did in office, because it was the last Labour government that raised the legal age for buying cigarettes to 18, raised the age for selling knives to 18, raised the age to buy fireworks to 18, and raised the age for using a sunbed to 18. I think that if she wants a lesson in inconsistency, she might like to examine the mirror.
Mr. Speaker, he mentions a range of restrictions that we have until the age of 18, but those are, for the most part, to do with public health, public safety and the prevention of crime. They are not the same as the basic right to vote on issues that affect your life once you are considered old enough to make other independent decisions about your life, such as leaving school, leaving home, getting married. Let me give the Minister a specific example.
Order, I'm sure it will not have escaped public notice, and it is rather a sad irony that when a woman is addressing the House, quite a lot of noisy, boorish and, in one case, rather stupid individual are trying to shout the Right Honourable Lady down. Cut it out. Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to give the Minister a specific example to illustrate what I'm talking about. According to the government's own figures, the number of 16 and 17-year-olds receiving carers allowance for looking after disabled relatives at home has risen by more than 50% over the past 4 years. So last year, over 2,000 16 and 17-year-olds gave up their youth, they often gave up their schooling, to care for relatives at home. How can it be fair? How can it be logical to expect for them to take on that responsibility because of failures of the state and then deny them a say on how that very state is run?
Mr. Speaker, I mean, the logic of the Honourable Lady's argument is that she wishes to lower the age of majority from 18 to 16. She listed a number of areas in which she supported the age at which activities should be allowed to 18 on grounds that only then could people be expected to have sufficient maturity and responsibility to have those rights. Now, my argument to her is that the age of majority should be set matching both rights and responsibilities. And I think that it is perfectly reasonable to say that from the age of 18, we entrust young men and women to exercise those rights and responsibilities in full. On the final point she made, it is right that sensible local authorities have particular care for the role of young carers, and in my experience, local authorities, whichever party runs them, make every effort to do that.
Emily Thornberry.
I have to say I'm genuinely surprised at the Minister's response because, after all, this is what he said 2 years ago speaking to the Youth Parliament, and let me quote him. When the voice and the vote of young people is absent, decisions are made that affect young people's lives that they have not always chosen. So, not for the first time in these exchanges, I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, that I agree with the Minister. All of us on this side agree with the Minister. So why does he no longer agree with himself?
Well, if she'd been with me at the Youth Parliament, which was indeed both a memorable and an enjoyable occasion, she would have discovered that a significant number of the young men and women there were actually over voting age. But I fully support the role that the Youth Parliament does, the role that their members do throughout the country, the role that organisations like school councils do, in getting young people used to the idea of exercising democratic responsibility. That seems to me an excellent training for the full adult responsibilities that they will inherit when they are 18, and I hope will encourage more young people to go out and vote.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he says that he was only talking about 18-year-olds, but, Mr. Speaker, you were there. He was talking to 370 under-18s. But, Mr. Speaker, what these discussions have revealed is that there is no logical, principled objection to votes at 16. That is why the Welsh and Scottish governments support it. That is why every single political party in this House supports it, except, of course, the Conservative Party and the DUP. Once again, joined in opposition to change. They're not the coalition of chaos, Mr. Speaker. They're the coalition of cavemen. But does the Minister... and does the Minister not realise the lesson that we...
Order. One member who thinks he knows what he's talking about is gesticulating at me. The answer is it's a matter of taste, not of order. It's blindingly obvious, and it shouldn't really escape somebody of great intelligence. Emily Thornberry.
I was talking about cavemen, Mr. Speaker, and what I wanted to say was this. Why doesn't the Minister realise the lesson that we women taught his predecessors 100 years ago? When change is right, it cannot be resisted forever, and this is a change whose time has come.
Mr. Speaker, I think my advice to the right honourable lady is to wean herself off the habit of watching old versions of the Flintstones on the relevant cartoon channel. I just think that we ought to salute the fact that not just the Youth Parliament, but many schools and other youth organisations throughout the country are working hard to get young people used to the idea that as they grow up, they should take an interest in current affairs, and then when they reach the relevant age, exercise the full rights and responsibilities of an adult by participating in elections and in political campaigning. But the situation we have here, Mr. Speaker, with the national voting age at 18 is one that is followed by 26 out of the 27 other members of the European Union, by the United States, Canada, New Zealand and Australia. Unless she is going to denounce all of those countries as somehow inadequate to her own particular standards, then quite honestly, Mr. Speaker, I wish she ought to grow up and try and treat this subject with a greater degree of seriousness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's policy on tax has made the UK one of the most competitive places to do business, confirmed by the recent growth figures. Therefore, does my right honourable friend agree raising tax would damage the UK economy, as we have seen in Scotland, where growth has fallen behind the rest of the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to agree with my honourable friend. We did devolve from this House new powers to Holyrood, and it's obviously for the Scottish Government to determine how to use them. It is a matter of great regret that they've chosen to use those powers to break their promises and penalise aspiration in Scotland. At our own budget, we increased the Scottish Government's spending power by £2 billion, so the SNP have no excuse for hiking the taxes of hard-working people, including public servants, and penalising businesses. The leader of the Scottish Nationalists in Westminster used to champion wealth creation and free enterprise. I hope he will ask the First Minister of Scotland to think again.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister to his place? If the reports are true, he may be auditioning for a new role, and I wonder if he's sending out a round-robin letter. Mr. Speaker, the Minister previously said that the single market is essential to the government's agenda for trade and competitiveness. Since BuzzFeed published the leaked Brexit analysis, does the Minister recognise that the single market is essential for jobs and prosperity?
Mr. Speaker, when we leave the European Union next March, we will, as a matter of legality, leave the single market and the EU customs union. The Prime Minister and the entire government, as set out in both the Lancaster House and the Florence speeches, are also making it clear that we are seeking a new partnership with our neighbours in the European Union that ensures that we continue to have frictionless trade, which is in the interest of not just our people, but the people of every one of the 27 other EU countries.
Ian Blackford!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say I'm surprised at the Minister, because it's not a question of legality. We're going to be in a transitional deal. You'll still be in the single market. The EU. Mr. Speaker, this is a government in crisis and an international embarrassment. The Chancellor, the Scottish Secretary, the Scottish Conservatives, the Home Secretary have all supported membership of the single market. Despite this, the government is still prepared to make everyone poorer. Where is the leadership?
Mr. Speaker, the leadership which the right honourable gentleman wants was set out very clearly both at Lancaster House and then again in Florence, and my right honourable friend the Prime Minister will be making further speeches on these issues in the weeks and months to come. But can I just say to the right honourable gentleman that the most important single market to the people of Scotland is the single market of the United Kingdom, which is worth nearly £50 billion every year to the Scottish economy, 4 times more than trade with the European Union. It is our deep and special partnership with the EU in the future that will help deliver prosperity to Scotland, not the separatist policies pursued by the Scottish National Party.
Mr. Ronald J. Wardener.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know my right honourable friend shares my passion for ensuring that all children get opportunity to succeed, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Can he confirm what progress the government has made in reducing the attainment gap between less well-off secondary school pupils and their peers, and given their positive impact when the next round of free school applications will open?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and the government's clear ambition and purpose is to ensure that our school system works for every child in every community in this country. Our reforms have already raised school standards. We're seeing now nearly 2 million more children attending good and outstanding schools, and the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and their peers has shrunk by 10% at GCSE and 10.5% at Key Stage 2 since 2011. I know that education ministers would be happy to talk to my honourable friend about their plans further to improve standards in schools.
Mr. Speaker, last Sunday in my constituency, Rhys Odelehi Waters, just 17, was stabbed with life-changing results. The knife crime across our country is not being driven by minors and young people. It's being driven by gangsters, organised criminals and dirty money. Cocaine alone is worth £12 billion, the market in this country, 100 tonnes crossing our borders. So I asked the Minister, why are we cutting our border force? Why are we cutting our police? And why has London been offered only, in their violence reduction strategy, a community fund of £500,000? You couldn't buy a house for £500,000 in London.
Mr. Speaker, can I first say that I, like every other member of this House, would have nothing but the most heartfelt sympathy for Rhys himself and for his family and friends at the most appalling experience that they have endured and are still living through. The honourable gentleman is right to say that there are complex causes to what we're seeing in terms of knife crime. There is no doubt, I agree with him, that organised crime is contributing to this, and organised crime is exploiting young people whom they try to groom to attract into criminal gangs. And the government is to publish later this year a violent crime strategy that will aim not just to look at the criminal justice system, but at how we work effectively with all other agencies to ensure that young people are diverted away from that sort of activity in the first place. But it's also true that we have, it's now, if you carry a knife, you can expect to end up in jail. We have toughened the sentences, and we have protected, despite what he said, we have protected police budgets. A quarter of all police are in London.
Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Demand for school places in the London Borough of Bromley are forecast to grow by some 20% over coming years, but repeatedly proposals for much-needed schools have been delayed in no small measure because of concerns at the way the Education Schools Funding Agency has handled the planning application process. On behalf of the Prime Minister, will my right honourable friend agree to meet with me to discuss the very real concerns that local parents have as to the competency of the agency?
Well, can I first say that either I or my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will be happy to talk to him. I mean, the purpose of the Education Skills Funding Agency, formed at the start of this financial year, was to provide a more joined-up approach to funding, covering both schools, colleges and other providers. I do note that Bromley has increased both primary and secondary school capacity by more than 6,300 places since 2010, and the ESFA is delivering 9 schools in Bromley, but clearly there's more work to be done, and ministers will gladly talk to my honourable friend about that.
Zeichner.
Speaker, recent research shows that international students are worth a staggering £20 billion to the UK economy. That research was commissioned by Nick Hillman, who was a Conservative parliamentary candidate in Cambridge in 2010 and a former advisor to Lord Willits. Yet the policies of the Prime Minister have stopped that steady increase in the number of international students coming to our country. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that it's a touch careless of the Prime Minister to have squandered billions of pounds that could have been available to our schools and hospitals?
Mr. Speaker, what the facts actually say is that we are the second most popular destination in the world for students, and university-sponsored visa applications are up by nearly 1/5 since 2010. So I would argue that, contrary to what he alleges, we're doing a good job in attracting international students.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Dorset is the most beautiful constituency in the whole of the United Kingdom. So improving the infrastructure is difficult to create jobs and prosperity. What we can do is improve our rail links on the Salisbury line and Yeovil Junction to get faster trains to Weymouth. Will my right honourable friend reassure my constituents and me that the government is behind this scheme to do exactly what the government wants, to create more wealth and prosperity in South Dorset?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend will know, the Chancellor last year set aside very considerable sums of money, more than £20 billion, to finance infrastructure improvements, rail, road and broadband, in order to generate growth around the country and to facilitate housing development. I know my honourable friend's constituency is one that has seen considerable new housing development in recent years. I'll ensure that transport ministers talk to him about the particular concerns he's expressed.
Cunningham. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 25th of January 1985, the Conservative government promised that there would be no nuclear waste dumped in Billingham and Hydrite mine. Will he confirm that promise still stands?
Well, he will have to forgive me if I say that my memory for statements that were given in 1985 is a little bit rusty. It was 7 years before even I was first elected to this House. I'll look into the point that he's raised. I'll make sure, and I will write to him to set out the position.
Ian Stewart. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To secure our future prosperity and to meet the employment challenge posed by artificial intelligence, this country has an urgent need to improve its digital skills base. Will my right honourable friend therefore congratulate the Open University in my constituency for securing a leading role in the government's new Institute of Coding?
Can I first of all join my honourable friend in congratulating the Open University for securing that lead role in the Institute of Coding. I think the Institute is going to be a very important new initiative to get universities to work very closely with business to develop specialist coding skills. And the government is investing £84 million to deliver a comprehensive programme to improve the teaching of the computing curriculum. We look forward to working closely with the university and the institute.
Killen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 10 years in this country, my constituent missed out on the right to claim indefinite leave to remain by 22 days when she left the country to attend her father's funeral and broke her leg, making her unable to return. The Home Secretary is aware of this case, and my constituent has been told she will have to wait a further 10 years to reapply. This will mean that she will be unable to adopt a child, which may be the only way that she can start a family in this country. Will the Minister raise this issue with the Prime Minister, and can we have a meeting to discuss this injustice when she returns?
Mr. Speaker, obviously I don't know more about the detail of the case than the honourable gentleman has just described in the House. But like many members, I have immigration casework in my constituency, so I'm familiar with the type of problem that he has described. If he would like to write to me after these exchanges, setting out the details, I will discuss that with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and the relevant minister will certainly meet him.
Tracy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week I visited RANS Culdrose as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme. I was delighted to see the great outreach programme that the sailors were doing to promote STEM skills and innovation to the local community. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this initiative to inspire the skills that both our armed forces and country will need to succeed in the future is a huge credit to the forward thinking of the team at Culdrose, and their approach should be highly commended?
My right honourable friend raises a very important point. I did know about the important role that Culdrose plays in the life of Cornwall. But what he has highlighted is the way in which the work at Culdrose deserves more of a national spotlight as well. And we want and we need to build the science, technology, engineering and mathematics skills that we'll need for a growing and rapidly changing economy. That was highlighted in the government's industrial strategy. And what my honourable friend has described as happening at Culdrose will contribute to the success of those objectives.
John Mann.
It is an extraordinary fact that this year, last year, every year for over a decade, one London borough, the London Borough of Islington, has received more Arts Council funding than the entirety combined of the Midlands and Northern ex-coalfield communities. Who is going to be brave enough to reverse this inequity so my constituents, and especially my young constituents, can have fair and equitable access to arts funding?
Well, I'm not sure whether that was meant as an attack directed on the right honourable member for Islington North or for Islington South. What I can say to the honourable gentleman this, that obviously if there's a particular bid that he feels was unfairly treated, he is welcome to take that up with the new Arts Minister, who I know will want to examine that case carefully. But in general terms, more than half of the arts funding in England is awarded to arts activities outside Greater London.
Steve Double.
Mr Speaker, holiday homes in Cornwall are a mixed blessing. They provide important support to our local economy, but they also take up vitally needed housing stock and push up prices beyond the reach of many local people. In addition to this, many of them avoid paying council tax by switching to business use and then enjoying the benefits of small business rate relief. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this situation is unacceptable, and would he use his good offices to help the government find a way of closing this loophole?
My honourable friend raises a valid point, Mr Speaker. Clearly it's right that holiday owners should pay the correct tax. Now, obviously, individual decisions on whether the property should pay council tax or business rates rest with the Valuation Office agency that operates independently of ministers, and rightly so. But if a property is available for rent for 140 days or more a year, then it will be subject to business rates, and if it does not meet this test, council tax will be due. And if an individual provides false information in order to seek business rate relief, that person is liable to summary conviction or a fine or both.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister wants to bring forward legislation to tackle domestic violence and abuse, but her government is currently taxing the same survivors for using the child maintenance service. Now, for survivors of domestic abuse, using the collect and pay service is not a matter of choice, it's a matter of safety. Will he urge the Prime Minister to commit to using this bill to scrap the tax for survivors of domestic violence?
Mr Speaker, there is a government consultation on this imminent, and I would urge the honourable lady to make her representations to that and also directly to the UK Minister concerned.
Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following last year's terrorist attack in Manchester, government has committed £24 million to the city, with the effects still being felt across the area and in my constituency of Cheadle too. Would the government give an assurance that they will continue to support Manchester?
We will certainly continue to support Manchester right across government through the various agencies and spending programmes that government has available. And I think that Manchester demonstrated last year its resilience and its strong sense of community identity and purpose, and that, I think, will serve it well both economically and socially in the years ahead.
Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the whole House will warmly welcome the fantastic news which has saved thousands of jobs at Bombardier in Northern Ireland. And we should pay tribute to the management of Bombardier, both in Belfast and in Canada, the workforce and the unions, which worked very well together. Honourable members in this bench, including the Honourable Member for East Belfast, and the government, which really rode in very strongly to support the company. But can I urge the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster now to get behind improving manufacturing in Northern Ireland? There are vital decisions that are outstanding, and can I gently urge the government, which I know always listens very, very carefully, to get on with it?
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank the right honourable gentleman for his words, and although it is a few years ago now since I had the opportunity to visit Bombardier in Belfast, I do still remember how important that enterprise is for the provision of high-quality, well-paid, skilled work in the city and more widely in Northern Ireland. He's right to say that the government worked closely with Northern Ireland leaders and politicians. The Prime Minister raised this question personally more than once with President Trump and with Prime Minister Trudeau, and my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has also been very active on behalf of Bombardier. We're pleased by the outcome. I think that he can rest assured the government will remain a strong supporter of business in Northern Ireland, but I would perhaps add that the sooner we can get back to devolved government in Northern Ireland, the easier it will be to ensure that practical benefits flow back to Northern Ireland.
Andrew Jones.
A vibrant high street is critical in traditional market towns like Knaresborough in my constituency, where there's been a market since 1310. In this age of internet shopping, will my right honourable friend confirm the government's support for traditional markets and policies that will boost our high streets?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to speak up on behalf of his constituents. I know he's a tireless campaigner for Harrogate and Knaresborough, and markets like the one in Knaresborough are part of the local fabric and tradition of towns right across this country. What the government wants to do is to help those markets and town centres to prosper in what is at the same time a rapidly changing retail environment, and I'm sure my right honourable friend the Community Secretary will be happy to write to him with further details.
Mr. Speaker, Lincoln's Walking Centre will close in a few weeks, despite the fact that there's inconsistent and insufficient service provision in place to mitigate the closure. My question is, will the Minister pass on to the Prime Minister my request for her to meet me to both discuss and review that closure?
Clearly, I think if she would like to set out a bit more detail than she's had the time to do today, I'll ensure that a minister does see her about this.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Next Wednesday, we will be assessing and voting on the local government finance settlement. A group of us from the Shire counties are very concerned that there is not enough money for rural counties like ours, where adult social care costs are spiralling out of control. In my own county, the counselling is facing a black hole of £10 million because of adult social care costs. What is the message I should take back to the leader of my council?
Mr. Speaker, I think one message to say to my honourable friend is that the government has made an extra £2 billion in funding available to local authorities, particularly for social care, and local authorities obviously are deciding at this moment whether they use the more flexible precepting powers that they have in respect of social care. I know that my honourable friend met my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, a few days ago, and I would encourage him to continue to talk to the Community Secretary and other ministers in that department about the particular circumstances in Shropshire.
Richard Burden.
The current edition of The Economist magazine carries an article which says that the hostile takeover bid for GKN by Melrose, and I quote, cast doubt not only on the survival of GKN, Britain's third largest independent aerospace and defence firm, but on much of the rest of the industry too. Now, the honourable gentleman knows that where national security issues are involved, ministers have the power to intervene to protect the public interest. Will they do so in this case?
Good.
As I understand it, the bid for GKN is being examined by the relevant independent authorities. Clearly, this is also something that the appropriate ministers in defence and business departments will be monitoring very closely. I think it would be wrong of me to speculate in more detail about this case for now.
Vicky Ford.
Mr. Speaker, my constituency of Chelmsford is a very popular place to live. And this week we've had the very good news that there are more first-time buyers getting on the housing ladder than any time in the past decade. Can my right honourable friend update us on the progress the government is making to help people to buy a house?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to be able to say that the number of first-time buyers is now at the highest level for about 10 years. And that is a tribute to the various initiatives that both the Community Secretary and the Chancellor of the Exchequer have put in place to encourage first-time buyers. Things like the cut in stamp duty that will benefit about 95% of first-time buyers. But we also need to improve housing supply. And constituencies like hers and mine are, I think, showing the way to much of the rest of the country about the need to build houses to meet the legitimate demands and expectations of young people who are working incredibly hard and want to get a foot on the housing ladder. Thank you.
Order.
And Prime Minister's questions comes to an end without the Prime Minister, who's in China. We watched David Lidington for the government. He's a Cabinet Officer Minister. And Emily Thornberry for Labour. She's the Shadow Foreign Secretary. And Emily Thornberry surprised us all by going on... First of all, she talked about the centenary of women's votes for women, and then about increased female representation. But most of the time, she then went on pressing Mr Lidington on why the government was against cutting the voting age, currently 18, to 16 for Westminster elections. Of course, it's lower in some of the devolved areas of the country, in Scotland and in Wales. But she wants, as is Labour policy, to cut the voting age to 16. But Mr Lidington was having none of it. He said that there were a lot of rights that you didn't get till you were 18, including the right, which I didn't know, to rent a sunbed. Apparently you have to be 18 for that. But Ms Thornberry snapped back to say there were many rights that you go to 16, and gave the example of carers, young carers who had given up their education to look after relatives who were ill. And there it was. That did surprise us. We didn't see that one coming. It was different. Whether it will go any further is another matter. Let's see. We'll talk about it with our panel. We've got the Foreign Office Minister Mark Field, the Shadow Brexit Minister Jenny Chapman, and our Deputy Political Editor John Pina. Now, John, we were talking while that was going. It was a kind of unusual thing to go on, not unimportant, but unusual since it's not on the agenda at the moment, and we said probably won't make any of the newscasts later in the day or tonight. But you talked about how this was playing to social media, that this would do well for Labour on social media. Explain what you mean.
I'm sure it will. I'm with Theresa May away and Jeremy Corbyn having a bit of a break, or working hard in his office, as the case may be. And we saw Emily Thornberry making the most of the dimmed spotlight by going for the target audience, I think. And this stuff is already, as we speak, being cut and put together to be put out online, if it isn't already, and I suspect that it is. And when it comes to the audience for that, well, a young audience is a large part of the audience for that. And we, of course, know that Labour is very keen to reach the younger audience. There's a bit of a statistical dispute about how far younger voters moved the market at the last election just at the moment. But we do know it's thought to be a more fertile patch of political territory for the Labour Party than for other parties in the main. And so this stuff of Emily Thornberry going hard for a cut in the voting age, that will look good on social media to a lot of people.
It's interesting that if you're right, that this was a conscious decision to go down this route, because it involves saying, all right, we know this isn't going to make the main news tonight on any of the channels, maybe not make much of the 24-hour news either after mid-afternoon, but we don't care because it will go big on social media, and for this week, if not for others, that's what's going to matter to us, and we get directly to the people that we want to appeal to young voters who may not be watching traditional terrestrial television.
I think that's exactly right. A lot of the time on a Wednesday afternoon at about this time in various studios in this building, we may say, well, maybe Jeremy Corbyn didn't land too many blows in that session. You're right. I don't think they care. It is about getting out in the way they want to, on the media that they want to the people they want to reach. And on many measures, it is working for them.
What do you make of that, Jenny Chapman? It's interesting.
It is interesting, but this is an issue that I know Emily cares deeply about, and she's campaigned on for a very long time. So she doesn't get the opportunity to deputise for Jeremy that often. And I'm not surprised, actually, that she should choose that issue on a day when we're, well, at a period of time when we're marking the expansion of the franchise, the anniversary of women getting the vote. I think it's a good issue. It's important. People care about it. I have many young people in my constituency write to me in support of it. So fair play to Emily for actually not going on one of the predictable issues and setting out a stall and campaigning on something that matters to her.
But it would seem from Mr. Lidington's responses that the government policy is to say, no, we're going to stay at 18.
I think that's right. And I think in part because David Lidington has responsibility for the Cabinet Office, it was a constitutional issue that actually made sense. And the fact that he had all the facts at his fingertips made me wonder whether he might even have been tipped off in advance that we may want to address this particular issue.
Well, he wouldn't have been tipped off by Labour, I
Well, no, I don't know. Maybe to have there was quite a good discussion that was had. No, I think the government's position is plain. I'm totally behind the government's position. I think David made it very clear, quite rightly, that actually at a time when, if anything, there's been a move towards regularising at 18 in terms of smoking, drinking. I think there's talk of the driving licence, people not being able to drive at the age of 17 and certainly having restrictions as drivers until past their 18th birthday, that it makes sense that you have that age.
You can drive at under 18, though, can't you?
I think you can at the moment, but I think there's been some talk of actually...
You definitely can. I thought 17, yes.
I passed my driving just 36 years ago, whenever it was. No.
So you're paying road tax
what I think
tax and...
What I think is slightly interesting, being candid with you, whilst I totally agree with the government's position on this, I think the move of history will be against us. I think
it will happen in one day.
It will happen at some point, and I suspect what Labour will do as part of their next election manifesto, they'll make more of this as an issue. And of course, what they're doing today, of course, is appealing to 14-year-olds who will be voters at the 2022 election. But in part, I think it'll be part of their constitutional modernising Britain. It'll be that this will be part of it. And I often say, until relatively recently, virtually every single general election, the Tories have done disproportionately well amongst women voters. We were the most anti-women getting the vote, over 100 years ago. It was, the whole suffragette movement. We were against it, as has been pointed out.
I thought there was some leading Tories in the suffragette movement.
There were. Well, eventually, actually, Emmeline Pankhurst was a big admirer of Stanley Baldwin, and in fact, she would have stood as a Tory candidate had she not died in the interim.
So Mark Field was against it, but thinks that history will make votes for 16
I think he's
inevitable.
right about that, and it would be good, actually, if the Tories just sort of confronted the inevitable and got on board with this. I know that many of their backbenchers agree with the Labour Party on this, so, let's see.
You would reduce the overall turnout, wouldn't you?
Why is that?
Because the turnout among the younger voters, take the 18 to 25 group, is the lowest of any demographic.
Well, let's see. We've had many predictions about declining turnout over the years at elections, and I think the tide is starting to turn. I think that the Brexit debate and the referendum and other things happening that are of great interest to young people are changing that. We saw the referendum in Scotland where 16-year-olds could vote and took part en masse. So I wouldn't accept that. I think we need to see.
Because the turnout of referenda is far, far bigger than general elections.
Yeah, yeah. But the evidence is actually there, we believe, that 16-year-olds take it seriously. You know, they take it as a responsibility, and that they did take part in Scotland. So that's
in
one
the
of
referendum.
That's right, but that's one of the. Well, they can't take part in other votes, can they? So we don't know what will happen.
Don't 16-year-olds have the votes for Holyrood?
But not at general elections.
No,
but
in Holyrood.
But the participation.
But the turnout in Holyrood
no,
is
I know,
very
but
low.
participation in regional and local elections is very small anyway. So that's not really a fair comparison.
John, when the cat's away, the mice will play. Mrs. May headed to China with a very bad weekend press for her, I think. We can all agree, with lots of criticisms, some named, some not named, against her leadership. But it would seem, am I right in thinking that, at least for the moment, given that she's away, the leadership speculation has not gained in momentum?
The speculation runs on its own momentum, but look, my feeling for it is that there's no imminent danger to Mrs. May, no sign of anything happening anytime very, very quickly. But the Conservative Party, the government side, are in a state of steady, settled instability. They're like a volatile compound that could go off at any moment, but it hasn't gone off, like a tube of nitroglycerin, which can sit perfectly peacefully on a shelf for quite a while, until the time for it to blow up the entire building. What maybe would be needed would be some sort of catalyst for that, whether it's a failure of command at number 10 Downing Street, which has people panicking and talking again, whether it's the May local elections, which are a problem and are worrying the Conservatives, especially when it comes to London. And if we're still talking about it further down the track, the autumn, when we start to see, or do not see, some direction of travel on Brexit, something on which the government is earnestly trying to get agreement that they can use as the basis for detailed negotiations. And there's no sign of that happening now. We'll know a little later on. If we do not get that in the autumn, assuming we get there, we will see panic in the Conservative Party, the Brexit side in particular, and they are the force behind this present volatility. They were near to taking off, blowing off before Christmas. And then we got that deal on stage one of the talks, and there was something of a false dawn.
And we thought, everything's quietened down.
It seemed to be. I never
then
really
came
believed
the
that.
cabinet reshuffle that wasn't.
Well, quite. So we're in a period of still water, but to torture the analogy, there are sharks in the water, and the wind could blow at any moment.
But for all the huffing and puffing and the increasing frustration among many Tories about Mrs. May's leadership, what keeps her there is the complete lack of any consensus on who should replace her.
If that is so, there's no one who's active now in trying to get her job. There's no campaign organised or disorganised just at the moment. We're still nowhere near the stage of Tory grandees meeting in drawing rooms in this neighbourhood and deciding what to do about the problem of Theresa. That happened at the end of Margaret Thatcher's time. It's not happening now, although when those meetings happen, they don't rush to tell the likes of me, but I get no feeling that's happening now. But it could kick off. And there are people there who would like the prize. Also, interestingly, though, when you talk to Tory MPs, you hear there's more talk now of, look, we've got past Boris, we've got past David Davis, maybe even Amber Rudd, who's biding her time quietly too. And there's more talk, well, let's just think about it and go for it. And you hear names like Tom Tugendhat and Johnny Mercer, who are even
jumping a generation.
Exactly so. Not in an active way, but the kind of conversation that we engage in almost every day of our lives, you hear that now.
And one of the disincentives provoking a leadership election is your party's procedures for electing a new leader. I mean, I think if there was to be a leadership contest, there would be more runners and riders than you'd get at entry.
Well,
I mean, I've had 18 names that would throw their hats in there. In fact, London could run out of hats.
The difficulty is, Andrew, when we both need hats, of course. The difficulty is anything I say will just add to speculation. So this is, I want to say nothing other than really to speak for my constituents who want us to get on and do the job. There's a job that needs to be done that is around. I think one thing I would say is, a lot of the speculation about stalking horses, of course, the rules do not accept that. I mean, there is an issue that would go to the confidence of the Prime Minister, but I think that I speak for many MPs, not just government, I mean, obviously I'm party pre as a member of the government, but many of my colleagues on the backbenches are despair of hearing colleagues either in the social media or on the TV or airwaves. There's a tough job to do, we all know that, and Mrs May is a very resilient woman who's put duty first. And I think, I mean, again, I find voters across the political divide writing to me saying that they very much admire that.
Resilience is certainly a characteristic. There are many other words you could use as well, but I think resilience, even her critics would agree, the way she hangs on in there. And it brings me to the question I just wanted to ask you. When we spoke to Labour people after the election result, after the party conference, and even at various crises in Mrs May's premiership, you kind of got the feeling you had to be ready, there could be an election at any time. Is that still the feeling in Labour, or are you now beginning to think it could just stumble from pillar to post for quite a while?
No, I mean, I think that we would be better with Labour-led negotiations on the Brexit issue, and I think we'd be better with a Labour government. So we are ready. We'd be very happy to take the reins should that be the country's wish, or should this minority government decide to stand aside. You know, we are there.
But are you expecting it? How would you rate the chances of a general election this year?
You are kidding if you think I'm going to try and predict what's going to happen in politics this year. Last year got it all wrong. So
I'm in the same boat.
Could you predict what's going to happen next week then?
No, anything. That's the thing. I would.
And that's the times we live in now, isn't it?
7 days' time, it will be Wednesday. I think we can say that.
I would have said that in December. I would have said after the Phase 1 negotiations were completed that Theresa May's position is secure. Now, you could say that she's got very little chance of making it to the summer recess. So, who knows?
Okay.
That's all, folks.